those topics, but I want to start with the topic that makes the boxing purist cry. Jake Paul, the now once beaten professional boxer, 6-1 after his decision defeat to Tommy Fury over in Saudi Arabia. Close fight, competitive fight. Not to criticize any of my fellow broadcasting peers, but I don't think it was a high-level fight by any stretch. That was sloppy, and the one knockdown had as much to do with the ring apron being slippery in that one spot as it did a power punch from Jake Paul. So, Jake Donovan, we'll start with you. You're impressed with the fight? Did it go how you expected? Did anything surprise you? What were your takeaways from Paul Fury Part 1?
Part 1, exactly. Well, I will say, look, I was on record saying I thought Jake Paul was going to win. So people were clowning Tommy Fury for celebrating as if he won. He matched Tyson Fury's achievement winning the heavyweight championship. This is his heavyweight championship. This is the biggest fight he is ever going to win. Maybe he goes on to beat a KSI or another YouTuber. This is his level. So that's really the only aspect that surprised me. I don't know if Tommy was at his best. I don't know. To me, it kind of looked like Jake was at his worst. So that did surprise me a little bit. I always said, I was ringside I think all three of us were ringside for his pro debut 3 years ago. And I always said that he was going to evolve to be far among, the best YouTubers, that he couldn't compete on that circuit because he was too good. So this was like the first time we saw him take a step backwards, I thought. Maybe with the first time around Woodley fight. But this one in particular, it was still competitive, though. So, the dare was go fight a pro boxer. He fought a pro boxer. I don't think there's a case for him to have won the fight. I was a little surprised that it was a split decision, but not really because it's boxing. I thought Tommy Fury did clearly win, but it was competitive. So I didn't think he disgraced himself in any regard. It just, I think all three of us can agree. It just wasn't, I guess it was entertaining in its own way, just not in the sense of an entertaining boxing match.
Corey, what'd you think?
Yeah, I thought that this was, a good competitive club level boxing match, which is not coming from me, that is not a pejorative in any way. As I wrote about on boxingscene.com, this is Jake Paul is probably in, I would say, the top 50% of active boxers globally, right? The boxing that we tend to see on the major broadcast outlets here is the top 5% of boxers globally, maybe 10%. And some guys will kind of slip in here and there on the undercards. But for Jake Paul to have taken up the sport 3 years ago and to be able to compete with someone like Tommy Fury, who has boxed his entire life, is, as I wrote, probably at this point kind of like a UK area level title contender type guy right now. He probably wouldn't win a European title today, but maybe that's kind of like a ceiling that he could aim for. Might even be too high. But even for Paul to compete with someone like that is still impressive. Now, people don't want to talk about that too much because it's a lot more fun to clown Jake Paul. And quite frankly, there's probably more currency in clowning Jake Paul. But for what this boxing match was, it was a competitive club level boxing match on the biggest possible stage that you could put something like that.
Jake, does, the outcome of a fight usually dictates whether or not there'll be a rematch. Now, Jake Paul does have a rematch clause. I don't know what the appetite would be for a country like Saudi Arabia or another Middle Eastern location to put on a rematch. Let's be real. That's where most of the money came from for this fight. The big purses both of them got. It obviously generates some money on pay-per-view. Probably a lot more money on pay-per-view in the UK than it did in the US, given the timing of it. And $50 is pretty expensive for a 5 o'clock Eastern time main event. So are you expecting there to be a rematch? I mean, Jake Paul said we're going to run it back. And if there is, A, is there a chance the outcome could be different? And B, is there going to be, do you think, an appetite for it?
I do think the outcome can be different. The appetite, that depends. Maybe there'll be one, there's an audience that wants to see if Jake Paul can overcome, adversity. To me, I always felt like he was playing with house money anyway. I don't think the law, maybe we'll get into this later, but I don't think the loss necessarily hurts him. Most people tend to watch. He has the Floyd Mayweather effect, except on a much lower level where people just kind of watch to see him lose. They pay to, he always gets booed everywhere he goes. So I think there's always going to be that interest in his career. Tommy Fury, I don't see why he wouldn't take it, especially, if he's enforced. My curiosity is where it lands. It obviously can't take place in the US. The Fury family has a lot to figure out in that regard. So Tyson could fight wherever he wants. Tommy is limited, and outside of a Jake Paul rematch, he's not going to make a lot of money unless he fights someone like KSI. So he's going to have to push all in for that. I just don't know. It seemed, it was, everyone was certainly watching on Sunday, so, people do pay attention when Jake Paul fights, but we kind of seen it. It's like, I don't know, it's that like, even like with Paul and Woodley, I thought the rematch was far less watchable up until that sensational knockout. That saved it. Up until then, that fight was, in my opinion, horrible. So I just don't know if anything could change from the first fight, other than, a better conditioned Jake Paul, which obviously, probably would lead to a win.
Corey, does Jake Paul, need to, quote, avenge this loss to continue to be as marketable as he once was? To Jake's point, like, if you're Jake Paul, there's just as much, if not more money in you fighting Nate Diaz. There's just as much, if not more money in you fighting KSI. You've got a lot of options in the crossover community that could make you a very rich man. But does he need to, go back and do Fury again before he moves on to something like that? Because people like Eddie Hearn have suggested, don't do it, Jake. Don't go back in with Tommy Fury. Fight KSI next. If you can make a deal with Nate Diaz or some other ex-UFC star, go ahead and do it. Does he need to go back and do that?
Well, I think to keep the same ceiling that maybe he thought he had, both in terms of the amount of dollars he could possibly make and also where he thinks he will wind up as a professional boxer, I think the answer to that is yes. And to Jake's point, colleague Jake's point, I think that there is room for improvement with Jake Paul still, right? There's more room for him to improve than there probably is for Tommy Fury. But as my other colleague, Chris Algieri, said on his podcast, he thinks that Tommy Fury beats Jake Paul 10 out of 10 times because the experience gap is just too wide. And no matter what, Tommy will continue improving just enough to always stay ahead of Jake Paul. So there's that. But I do think that there's also there's that plan B for Jake Paul, which is facing the KSIs, which is going back to the kind of faded MMA fighter circuit. And there will continue to be a market for that. It might be a smaller market because I think that there's a group of people that were tuning in, that were hate watching, that are now satiated because they saw Jake Paul lose. There's still, though, a big group of people that want to see him lose worse. And there's still a very big group of people that love Jake Paul, right? Like, his audience isn't just haters. There are people that really adore this person and will continue to face him. Or will continue to tune in to watch him. But he can always go to the other side. And by the other side, I mean kind of the pure influencer circuit, the KSI side of the road, which is kind of opting out of being true pro boxers, right? The KSI's fights aren't on BoxRec. They're not trying to oversell what they are. They're just selling grudge matches between influencers. And as long as he's okay with going and doing that, that is still there for him and it will still be wildly profitable.
Jake, I get Corey's point and Chris Algieri's point to a degree, but I don't agree with the Chris Algieri statement that Tommy Fury would win 10 out of 10 times. Like that Tommy Fury won that fight. I scored it for him. I agree with you. I don't think it should have been a split decision. He should have won that fight by a point or two. But like, Jake can get a little bit better, as he has in virtually every one of his fights. That was the best I've seen Tommy Fury look. And I've seen, 3 or 4 of his fights live, either in person or on TV. I think Jake can absolutely improve to the point where he can win a decision against Tommy Fury. I think he came into that fight thinking Tommy wouldn't be able to take the overhand right. Well, Tommy was prepared for the overhand right. Yep. And when he did get caught with some shots, he took them because he's younger, fresher, he's got a real chin. That's what happens. I think if Jake's smart, and he is, he goes back in the gym, makes some adjustments, maybe comes out as more of a boxer in the next time. That to me is the intrigue. Because I don't believe it's an unwinnable fight for Jake Paul. In fact, I think it's very winnable if he changes some of his game plan and fights a different way.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And, to your point, like it was almost to the point where he was kind of telegraphing that we kept saying, everyone reported it, that's his money punch. Tommy Fury knew that was coming, and Jake Paul, sure enough, he threw it, and Tommy Fury was prepared for it. I mean, I even joked, I think it was when Fury fought Anthony Taylor. I said, I don't even think he's ready for Sean Paul, never mind Jake Paul. So this was like the evolution of Tommy Fury in 2 years more so. And again, Jake Paul, he doesn't owe anyone an apology. He can go back to YouTube. I think it's kind of done him a disservice to try to prove to people that he can hang with an actual boxer because his pay-per-view numbers have actually gone down. I haven't seen the figures yet for this one. Maybe it goes back up, but he's trended downward since, he was on the Tyson Jones undercard, and then even when he fought Ben Askren. So going back to that YouTube circuit, I think it's going to work to his benefit, like, as far, from a pure profit standpoint. So it's going to be up to him. Honestly, he has nothing to prove. He went in there, he shut everyone up. He fought a boxer. He came close. Yeah. So maybe go and do the rematch, prove you can actually beat a boxer. I mean, he can go and fight, I think Luis Pineda, the guy that KSI fought, who's become a big star in the misfit boxing circuit. I mean, go fight someone like that and beat him. It's worked for KSI, so why wouldn't it work for Jake Paul?
Who's that guy? And Corey, you probably know the answer to this. Salt Shaker? Salt? What?
Salt Poppy.
Salt Poppy.
Yes.
Salt Poppy.
And he's called out both of them.
I sounded so old saying that. Salt Poppy right there. But that guy comes in with some energy, man. He's got an attitude there to him.
That's a perfect opponent. Yep.
It's good. It'll be fun. I actually prefer Jake Paul. I think he's going to take the rematch. I think we'll probably see it in the UK. Both those guys can make a boatload of money, but either way, I think Jake Paul's got a future in that influencer circuit.